Hi there, everybody. So this is a little bit different. So I did not plan this at all. I got hit with a huge doses of inspired action. And I was inspired to refresh my memory on Spinoza. So my knowledge of him is actually only superficial. I do know of his controversial takes on God, and I suspected the Hermetic lodges took these highly controversial Spinozian takes on the cause of all causes, or the first cause, where God is actually a substance and not an anthropomorphistic deity at all. So God is in that sense uncaring and devoid of personality. I believe Einstein also refers to his belief in God in similar way. So we understand God exists because God is synonymous to nature. God is nature. They are synonymous in Latin. When it is said within a Freemasonic text that it has to be verified in nature's laboratory, they are essentially speaking to this Spinozian idea of substance, I suspect. And of course, back in the day, before science was actually called science, we called it philosophy of nature or natural philosophy. So God and nature go hand in hand, naturally speaking. And this is also where Spinoza is coming from, a golden age in the Dutch Republic. So this is his backdrop, his background, basically. I actually do want to talk a little bit about Spinoza before I move on, just because I also like history quite a bit, and maybe you'll enjoy it as well. So Spinoza's ancestry actually leads back to the Jewish community on the Iberian Peninsula. So within Spain, the Kabbalah came into existence, and this is also the area where Spinoza actually came from. Well, at least his parents came from there. So during this time, there was, of course, the Muslimic conquest was happening. It had conquered Spain, and eventually the parts of Europe fought back and retook Spain. So this was during the Reconquista, eventually followed by the Inquisition. And so Spinoza's family had to leave. The Catholic Church became increasingly more intolerant. It was either die or convert. That was basically it. And for a time, Jews living there, Portuguese and Spanish Jews, would practice their Judaism in secrecy. So this is a time in Europe where it's very tense. So the family of Spinoza actually fled to the Dutch Republic, which was a natural enemy of Spain at the time. The Dutch Republic was actively fighting and pushing back against Spain's influence. So they fled to the Dutch Republic, and for a very small window of time, the Dutch Republic was a safe haven for free thinkers. And sadly, this tolerance would only last for so long, because the founding father eventually was assassinated. This is William the Silent. And then the Calvinistic Church was established and became the state religion, effectively nullifying all of the tolerance and freedom that the Republic at first embraced. And so during these tense times, where most Jews occupied districts within Amsterdam, Spinoza grew up and went to a Talmudic Jewish school, if I'm not mistaken. He would eventually, after a prolonged struggle within his community, see to a permanent break from the rabbinical way of thinking. They actually excommunicated him for his controversial ideas. He was eventually also banned from the city of Amsterdam. He lived an interesting life during very tense and tumultuous times. But yes, he was like 23 years old, intensely intelligent, already a prolific thinker during a time of religious and political unrest. It's quite admirable, I have to say. Anyway, so with that out of the way, according to Spinoza, this substance, God for instance, is inherently descriptive by and in of itself. By calling something that is a substance by its definition, we will understand what it is without a need for resting on other definitions to describe it. It is conceptually independent and ontologically independent. So the Merovingian, a program in the Matrix movie, is a modus to the substance. A program, just like a modus, cannot exist without its master, and so he sees no sense in free choice, but rather he observes a chain of causality. He is a slave to said causality himself. This is also the inherent irony when he meets the three heroes. Seeing this truth with his own mind, with his expanded awareness, he became the true magician. He understood the underlying processes that lead to certain outcomes. As such, he has evaded his own demise and existed for a very long time. Interacting with Neo and Trinity, he is also reminded of the anomalies or the insanity that occurs when one is acting from a place of love, overrides the logical and predictable. There is an inbuilt irony here because the One and Trinity are both attributes of a substance called God. Anyway, so as I was dusting off the book, the only book on Spinoza that I own, my spirit team kept reminding me of the Temperance card, Crowley's edition specifically. So that is what I eventually gave into, and looking at the text, I was reminded of what I usually feel when I look at it. This card really goes to town. All registers are opened, blasting every possible symbol and concept in a near spurious cacophony. I have to think of Baroque organs with the little cherubs and the many trumpets, the pinnacle of the Baroque culture, an impossibly big instrument with a tiny human playing it, like a Wizard of Oz. There's so much to take in, the sounds, the images, most importantly, witnessing the skill it takes to play such an impossible instrument with all of its registers and pedals and keys. What it produces is not necessarily very pretty either, but it is most definitely very impressive. The text within the Book of Thoth itself comes off as almost disingenuous, meant to confuse rather than explain. However, my previous study of Crowley's work showed me, at the very least, that this is not entirely true. A lot of trumpets, way too many for the rich textures and complex melodies, in my opinion, but listening to it enough times leads to greater appreciation. Okay, so in order for us to understand the true essence of something, Spinoza suggests that we leave behind the phenomenological reasoning and move beyond plain seeing, beyond what our senses are telling us, basically. These observations are often confused or vague. He takes the example of wax, which is a substance that changes its attributes after it is placed near a heat source. As a result, the solid piece of wax that we first saw underwent significant changes, yet its essence remains unchanged. Nothing about the truth of this substance, called wax, really changed. What we see, smell, and feel when we interact with it did change. And so he reasons that the empirical observations are not essential to a thing. What he observed were accidental properties. If we really seek to understand this piece of wax, we extend our reasoning beyond mere accidental observations and relay the information to our minds. Here we craft a broader picture of what wax actually is in essence. Just like in the Temperance card of Crowley, or rather the Art card, we see the necessity of moving beyond the mere senses. These sensual observations would be confused and just accidental. There are perhaps many accidental properties addressed within this very card, but its true essence, the substance, remains unchanged. Now, I don't know anything useful about magic, and I was never part of any group, let alone the OTO. And so at this point, as Crowley describes in this book, he withholds information that is only suitable for the disciple of a certain grade or certain level. And so it appears that the only thing an ignoramus, like me for instance, can take from this card is that large parts of it remain obscured. But considering Spinoza's line of reasoning, that is far from the truth. It will also prove to be a test if this occult idea proposed within the art card actually holds up to rationality. So, I think after reading the text, the most important parts to take from this are: 1, this is part of the great work. 2, the hidden stone is a universal medicine called Ethos. Crowley also draws a clear line between what he believes to be dead, excrement, and alive, creational, I suppose. He says, for example, that transmuting of metals is difficult because these are considered excrements of nature. They are excrements because they do not grow, they do not reproduce. They simply are the result of nature's processes. And so it's interesting that he puts the word actual between quotation marks when speaking of actual objects regarded as dead. This hints after the idea that there's more to the word actual in relation to its object that meets the eye, and it appears that it is exactly what the art card intends to employ to address the substance of said object. Now, to raise something considered dead to a vegetable state is the first step toward raising life within something that was previously absent from it. It is the lowest expression of life, according to Aristotle, who went to great lengths to categorize the plant and animal kingdom. He would determine their universal traits and then place them within a diagram in relation to one another. If we're to think about it, when we consider the stories about a homunculus or a golem creature, it means that even though this creature was raised from an unliving state to a living state, much like a glob of wax heated under the flames and undergoing a significant change, it doesn't change the substance. And so that means that a golem maintains its essence of the materials it was fashioned from, even though it was breathed into a living state through the means of magic. And the same could be said for Adam, I suppose. Crowley addresses the notion to imitate nature, and this implies to imitate God. But of course, Crowley isn't the type to believe in God as a supernal deity. At least he appears more aware of the Spinozian notion that there's an ever-pervasive essence that is universal to all creation. According to the philosopher, the substance of God is unique, for it encompasses an infinity of attributes, and each and every one of them expresses the essence of what God is into infinity and eternity. This idea may come very, very close to the very idea of what Ethos, the universal medicine, actually is, but I cannot say I know for certain. It appears to be a mistake to consider Ethos a substance that is created out of nothing, or an alien substance that just fabricated in some way by composing it of dualistic elements. It is rather a substance that is malleable and turned into a stone that is then considered the universal medicine. It is why it can be a stone and it can be a solvent. It can be completely elastic and completely rigid, as Crowley describes it within his book. They can be both water and fire. It's all about the substance, the universal substance that Ethos entails. Now, when we look back at the interaction between Neo, Morpheus, and Trinity and the Merovingian,
the answer to that question. But do you? You think you do, but you do not. You are here because you were sent here. You were told to come here, and then you obeyed. It is, of course, the way of all things. You see, there is only one constant, one universal. It is the only real truth. Causality. Action, reaction, cause and effect.
Everything begins with choice.
No, wrong.
it appears that the three heroes have a very different understanding of reality than the Merovingian does. Morpheus sees at the root choice, whereas the Merovingian sees only causality. This does not mean that Morpheus is wrong, even though the Frenchman boldly states that he is. Within Spinoza's text, it's explained that a substance can actually have two attributes. This is a little bit deceptive because it implies subjectivity, but that is not the case. When speaking of the substance of a thing in rational terms as proposed by the philosopher in question, there is no place for subjectivity. Once again, we're reminded of that glob of wax that he was taking as an example. He reasons that two people can both have a complete picture of the fundamental nature of a thing, yet are able to offer entirely incomparable, independent descriptions of said thing. This, once again, harkens back to the accidental state of a thing, where a glob of wax can be solid or liquid, yet never changes in its substance. This process of converging these universal attributes, although accidentally paradoxical, we're seeking the substance of a given thing, namely azoth, and this is what appears to be happening in the art card over and over again. And I'll end the video here, so I hope you enjoyed it. Have a nice day.